O winter, 1943. Across the overcast fields of southern England, the air war had settled into a cruel rhythm. Daylight raids by American bombers, counterattacks by German interceptors, and the long return flights home that too often ended in silence. Every mile east of Dover was ruled by the Luftwaffe. On paper, the Americans were outmatched. Fewer veterans, less experience, and aircraft the enemy considered naive experiments. Then the Lockheed P-38 Lightning arrived. It didn't look like anything the world had ever seen. 2 engines, twin booms, a central pod for the pilot, and a wingspan broad enough to cast its own weather. To the German aces who first glimpsed it slicing through cloud, it looked almost comic. One Luftwaffe pilot later wrote, "We thought the Americans had run out of ideas." In mess halls across occupied France, they joked that the strange fork-tailed design was a target large enough for both wings to miss. Yet among the Americans at the muddy airfields of Norfolk, laughter was scarce. The P-38 was fast, faster than any U.S. fighter before it, but temperamental. In the cold air of northern Europe, its turbochargers froze. Controls stiffened like iron rods. Engines overheated, and more than one squadron lost men not to the enemy, but to physics. A mechanic at the 55th Fighter Group remembered, "You didn't fly the Lightning, you negotiated with it." The USAAF needed the plane to work. Their heavy bombers, the B-17s and B-24s, were bleeding crews on every run over Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolt could not yet reach Berlin, and the P-51 Mustang was still months from full deployment. If the 8th Air Force was to survive, something had to escort its bombers all the way to the target, and home again. So, the Lightning went to war. Its first combat over Europe came in drab weather above France and the Low Countries. The Germans saw it coming and laughed again. 2 engines meant twice the smoke. Its silver skin flashed against the clouds. But what they hadn't reckoned on was its speed in a dive, nearly 400 miles per hour, and the precision of 5 guns clustered in the nose. No convergence, no guessing. What the pilot saw was what he hit. Still, early missions went badly. Pilots wrestled the controls in frigid air. Many never returned. Intelligence reports in Berlin described the P-38 as technically interesting, but tactically irrelevant. The Axis believed their laughter justified. Then the war shifted south. In the clear blue over the Mediterranean, the Lightning found the air it had been built for. At altitudes where single-engine fighters gasped, the twin Allison V-1710s thrived. Pilots from the 1st and 82nd Fighter Groups, men hardened by defeat in North Africa, learned the machine's rhythm. One of them, Lieutenant Jack Ilfrey, later said, "Up there, she wasn't strange anymore. She was alive." From bases in Tunisia and Sicily, P-38s ranged far into Axis territory. They struck at convoys off Naples, rail yards in Italy, and even the oil fields of Ploesti. German pilots stopped joking. They began to whisper about a twin-engine fighter that appeared out of nowhere, attacked head-on, and vanished before they could react. On April 18, 1943, 16 Lightnings rose from Guadalcanal on a mission unlike any before to intercept a Japanese transport carrying Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor. They found him exactly on time, at 9:34 a.m. 2 P-38s dived through cloud and cut his plane from the sky. The operation's name was Vengeance. Its success echoed across both oceans. In Europe, the Luftwaffe heard the news. The same aircraft they had dismissed as a curiosity had just executed one of the most precise intercepts in military history. By the summer of 1943, new squadrons of P-38s were landing in Italy, their tails shining like quicksilver in the sun. A young pilot wrote home, "The Germans called her a mistake. We'll see who laughs last." The laughter was fading, replaced by something closer to respect, and soon enough, fear. By late 1943, the tone in the Luftwaffe debriefing rooms had changed. Reports from Sicily and the Mediterranean front described a twin-engined American fighter that could climb like a falcon and strike with uncanny precision. What had once been mocked as a technical oddity was now earning another name among German pilots, Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The transformation of the P-38 Lightnings from an engineering problem into a predator did not happen in a factory. It happened in the sky. In the heat of the Mediterranean, its engines breathed freely. Its long legs, that incredible range, turned it into something the Axis had never faced before. A fighter that could fly hundreds of miles beyond the front lines, escort the bombers all the way, and still have fuel to fight. The same machine that struggled in the damp English cold now owned the blue horizons of southern Europe. At Foggia and Salerno, crews watched their silver aircraft rise in pairs, their twin tails glinting against the morning haze. A pilot named Lieutenant Charles Red Moyer recalled, "She wasn't just fast, she felt fast. You'd shove the throttle and the world just fell away beneath you." The Lightnings began to prowl deep into occupied territory, hitting trains, convoys, and airfields from the Adriatic to Austria. It wasn't just air combat anymore. It was harassment, precision, and persistence. A new kind of air warfare that Germany's overstrained defenses couldn't match. In late 1943, when the 8th Air Force prepared its long-range bombing of German industry, it was the P-38 that first cleared the way. The 82nd Fighter Group escorted B-24 Liberators through flak and interceptors toward Regensburg. They came home riddled with holes, but they came home. Voice of narrator, documentary tone. The Lightning was more than a machine. It was a bridge between the bombers that struck from the clouds and the men who had to get them back alive. Then came the moment when the world took notice. Operation Vengeance had already proven what the Lightning could do in the Pacific, but Europe would see its own reckoning. In early 1944, the 1st and 14th Fighter Groups launched a series of deep penetration raids over northern Italy. One engagement over Anzio became the stuff of legend. A handful of Lightnings, outnumbered 5-1, met a swarm of Messerschmitt Bf-109s at 20,000 feet. The German pilots expected the Americans to scatter. Instead, they turned into the attack, head-on, guns blazing, the roar of twin Allisons drowning out the world. In less than 10 minutes, 12 German fighters were down. The survivors fled east. The P-38s limped home with fuel gauges near zero, one engine sputtering, wings torn by flak. But they had rewritten the balance of fear. Archival voice. "When we landed, nobody said a word. We just looked at each other. We knew what we had become." Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Majors Richard Bong and Majors Thomas McGuire, both flying P-38s, were carving their names into the annals of aviation. Bong would finish the war with 40 victories, McGuire with 38. They proved that the Lightning could do more than survive. It could dominate. The Luftwaffe, once supremely confident, began to issue new briefings. Avoid prolonged climbs with twin-engined American fighters. Never engage head-on. Their own words betrayed the truth. Fear had replaced ridicule. And the Lightning's legend spread in both theaters of war. American newspapers ran photos of its distinctive twin tail, calling it the plane that can't be outrun. On bases from Italy to New Guinea, ground crews painted thunderbolts across the nose and nicknames beneath the canopy: White Lightning, Double Trouble, Forked Tail Fury. Every squadron had its own story. The pilot who limped home on one engine, the pair who shot down 5 in a single mission, the one who vanished into cloud and was never seen again. Each story carried the same undercurrent. The Lightning had earned her name. By 1944, even the British, who had once favored their own Spitfires, admitted the P-38 had something rare: endurance. It could fly longer, fight farther, and bring its pilots home. The laughter was gone. In its place was the low, reverent murmur reserved for machines that changed the course of war. As the Allies prepared for the great invasion of Europe, the Lightning stood ready, not as an experiment, but as a symbol, a twin-engine question that had become a single, undeniable answer. "They said it couldn't fight," one pilot would later say. They were right. It didn't fight, it hunted. By the spring of 1944, the laughter had vanished. Over the broken fields of Italy and the dark forests of southern Germany, the Luftwaffe began to face something it could neither outrun nor outclimb. The P-38 Lightning, once dismissed as a curiosity, had become a hunter. Each dawn at the Foggia complex, ground crews worked by lantern light, checking bullet holes and fuel lines. Frost covered the silver skins of the aircraft like a second camouflage. The men called her the Twin Miracle. She could carry them farther than any other fighter, and, if wounded, still limp home on one engine. In early May, the 1st and 82nd Fighter Groups were tasked with escorting bombers striking Wiener Neustadt deep in Austria. The Luftwaffe launched everything it had left: Me-119s, FW-190s, even a few Me-110 Zerstorers climbing sluggishly into the sun. German radio intercepts later recorded disbelief. Zweimotorige Jäger, so hoch, twin-engined fighters at that altitude. The battle erupted at 25,000 feet. American bombers pushed north in tight formations, while the Lightnings fanned out ahead, their contrails crossing like scars. One pilot, Lieutenant Hal Jones, remembered the moment contact came. You didn't see them first, you felt them. The sky began to move. Jones rolled inverted, firing a burst that tore through a 109's fuselage. His wingman took a hit and fell away trailing smoke, but the rest pressed forward. For 20 minutes, the air turned into a geometry of death, diving, climbing, spinning, the twin engines screaming against gravity. When the last German broke off, the sky was empty again, and the bomber stream droned east unmolested. By the time they landed, gun cameras told the story. 16 enemy fighters down, 2 Lightnings lost. The numbers would never balance emotionally, but strategically they told everything. Germany's air arm was bleeding out. Documentary voice. In war, superiority is not a claim. It is a condition measured by who controls the daylight. Through the summer, P-38s ranged across Europe. They struck marshalling yards in Hungary, supply columns in the Balkans, bridges along the Po River. Each mission pushed deeper, testing the limits of fuel and endurance. Crews began flying with small charms taped to the cockpit glass. Saints, girlfriends' photos, a scrap of home, because the distances felt endless. In one celebrated mission over Ploesti, the Lightnings came in low, their turbo superchargers wailing. Flak shredded the sky, but the formation held. Bombs exploded below, fire blooming across the refineries that fed the German war machine. When the last plane turned for home, the radio crackled with quiet relief. Lightning flight returning, targets aflame. News of the raid reached Berlin that night. The Luftwaffe staff understood what it meant. A twin-engined fighter was now operating at ranges once reserved for bombers. The concept of a front line in the air no longer existed. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire were turning the same machine into legend. Their victories piled up, Bong's 40th, Maguire's 38th. But both knew the cost. Every time you go up, Bong said in a letter, you leave part of yourself behind. Across 2 oceans, the P-38 had become more than a weapon. It was the physical expression of an idea that American industry and imagination could build something no one else dared conceive. Its silhouette, those twin tails and central nacelle, was instantly recognizable, and to every enemy pilot who saw it glinting in the sun, instantly feared. In the final months before D-Day, the Lightnings flew cover for the invasion buildup, cutting rail lines, hunting trains, and erasing airfields. Reconnaissance versions, stripped of guns but armed with cameras, brought back the clearest images of Normandy ever taken. The same shape that once invited ridicule now carried the eyes of an entire army. Voice of narrator. Dominance is not noise, it is silence. The silence left when no one dares rise to meet you. By winter's end, the Luftwaffe's veteran cadre was gone, replaced by boys barely trained. They faced the fork-tailed shadow with trembling hands. The machine that had been laughed at now owned the air. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the skies over Europe were no longer a battlefield. They were monuments, invisible yet eternal, to the machines and the men who had ruled them. Among the twisted wreckage of Mi-1009s and FW-190s scattered across airfields from the Ruhr to Vienna, one silhouette lingered in memory, the twin silver tail of the P-38 Lightning. In less than 3 years, the aircraft once derided as Lockheed's mistake had become an icon of air superiority. It had served in every theater of the war, from the jungles of New Guinea to the snows of the Alps. It escorted bombers, photographed cities before invasion, strafed convoys, and outflew enemies who had laughed at it. By war's end, Lightnings had destroyed more than 1,800 enemy aircraft and flown over 130,000 combat missions. But the numbers tell only part of it. At a small airbase in Italy, where the 82nd Fighter Group once stood ready, The surviving pilots gathered for one last photo before shipping home. Their flight suits were faded, their eyes hollowed by fatigue and memory. One of them, a captain named Joe McGraw, looked at the two engines of his aircraft and said quietly, "She never let me walk home." The mechanic beside him nodded. "She had two hearts," he replied, "and she gave us both." Voice of narrator. For the men who flew her, the Lightning was more than metal. It was a partner, sometimes cruel, sometimes merciful, that carried them through the storm of history. In the Pacific, the P-38 remained in service long after newer aircraft took the stage. In Europe, it faded quickly from the post-war headlines, replaced by jets that promised a cleaner, faster future. Yet the veterans remembered. At reunions in Kansas City and San Diego, they would point to faded black and white photos and trace the twin booms with trembling fingers. "That's the one," they'd say. "That's the bird that changed everything." Historians later called it a bridge design, the last of the great propeller fighters, the first to anticipate the jet age. Its engineering fingerprints could be found in nearly every American aircraft that followed. Long range, heavy armament, and the confidence that technology could compensate for odds. But the deeper legacy lay in perception. The P-38 proved that innovation and audacity, qualities often mocked, could become decisive strengths. It turned ridicule into respect. The Germans who once laughed at it ended up writing combat manuals warning their pilots to avoid it. The lesson was not lost on American designers or commanders. In war, as in life, it is the misunderstood ideas that sometimes win the longest battles. At the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a restored Lightning hangs from the ceiling, frozen mid-climb. Visitors walk beneath it, children pointing at its twin tails, veterans pausing a little longer than they mean to. Underneath the aircraft, a simple inscription reads, "They laughed, then they ran." The camera lingers on the metal surface, polished now, no longer scarred by flak or time, as the voiceover fades in again, measured and reverent. In 1943, they said the Lightning was too strange to survive. In 1945, it had conquered two oceans and rewritten the doctrine of air power. History often begins in disbelief and ends in awe. A final shot, dawn light over a modern runway, a single surviving P-38 roaring to life. The twin props spin, slow at first, then faster, until they blur into a single sound, a steady rising hum that feels both ancient and alive. As it lifts into the sky, the narrator delivers the last line. "They called it a joke. The world learned otherwise. The Lightning still flies,